The United States of America is mired in debt, which seems to be spiraling out of control. It pays for the world's most expensive healthcare system, but has a falling life expectancy. Over 3% of its population is currently undocumented. It has 700 mass shootings a year, a collapsing middle class, and escalating polarization and political violence. Each of these problems has its own causes, but together they point towards something deeper and structural. Our republic has stopped creating solutions to its problems. This is an existential threat because republics that don't solve problems gridlock and either embrace authoritarians who will solve those problems, fall into civil war, or suffer foreign conquest. Americans typically agree that we've already come close to national disintegration. The left views the events of January 6th and the reckless presidency that preceded it as a time when the nation came inches from collapse, while the right saw the death of the republic in the riots of 2020, an allegedly stolen election, and the violation of civil liberties during the pandemic. Both correctly focus on divisive presidents and rancorous presidential elections as a flashpoint for our declining political culture. When the role was designed, the American president was supposed to be a nonpartisan chosen by electors. He would provide steady administration of law and protect the rights of political minorities from majorities. Our Constitution doesn't achieve these outcomes because it didn't incorporate the role of parties. The Electoral College became a winner-take-all crapshoot. Leadership became volatile as administration of law swung from one party to the other. And the presidency became a tool for political majorities to extract concessions. The two-party system has also wrought havoc on the judicial branch. The veneer of a nonpartisan Supreme Court has been washed away by the party's efforts to seize control. Compounding this, court appointments are often longer than life because members of the Supreme Court can resign during the term of an ideologically similar president. This means the only visible paths to a balanced judiciary are court packing, which would permanently destroy the court's independence, or assassination, which would provoke revenge and further violence. The legislative branch might be in the worst situation of the three. When its two bodies are controlled by different parties, it's seized by gridlock because the parties have nothing to gain by working together. In addition, the entirety of Congress is composed of single-member districts, so each constituency sends a lawyer or a wealthy business person to negotiate as much federal money for their district as possible. This cookie jar approach is why the re-election rate was 94% for the House and 100% for the Senate in 2022, despite Congress hovering at 20% approval in the polls. Congress does a good job of getting re-elected, but a poor job running the country. This discrepancy is also explained by gerrymandering. Democrats in Utah and Republicans in Connecticut have no federal representation. Both are one-party states where seats are won during primaries and general election outcomes are about as certain as they are in North Korea. In sum, representatives are only interested in serving their party's activists. Red states are not supported by Democrats, and blue states are not served by Republicans. This is why our nation is indebted, divided, and sclerotic. This isn't the first time our republic has been on the brink of failure. Our first attempt to design a republic was the Articles of Confederation, which functioned adequately for a time, but eventually resulted in a series of policy disasters. After a failed insurrection, the Founding Fathers chose to design a more perfect union, and created our current Constitution. We now have the same choice they did: national death or constitutional reform. What do we want from a reformed constitutional system? First, parties should represent a diversity of ideas, compete with each other to win elections, but not stop their members from working with opponents for the national welfare. Second, we need input from local and special interests on policies that affect them. Third, all legislation should be written for the public good by nationally elected legislators who represent all of the people. Fourth, domestic and foreign policy should be executed to a single vision, with leadership provided by a unifying figure. Fifth, refereeing the division of power and districting should be done by nonpartisans. Now we do what the Founding Fathers did. We dedicate a branch of government to each of our desired outcomes, give them a structure that matches their intended function, and add checks to balance their power with each other branch of government. We won't change the Bill of Rights or try to solve any specific policy problem. Instead, we'll focus on creating a system of effective national problem solving and allow it to work. This approach yields a system that looks complex but operates simply and coherently. The 2 new branches will come from existing institutions, and the 3 old branches will be reformed to improve their function. Though we might like to imagine a world without political parties, they're an important part of how large democracies function. They coordinate national policy, identify candidates for office, establish electoral brands, and help run campaigns. Countries with the best government institutionalize the role of parties so they work well within their frame of government. First, we need to decide how many we want. It's tempting to say that we ought to open up our system for as many parties as people want. We have a very large and diverse republic, currently held together by 2 strong national parties, which force many different constituencies to work together. With unlimited parties, the country would fracture. You would create more candidates and parties than voters could effectively evaluate. You would create and empower dozens of separatist and extremist movements that would play kingmaker and force larger parties to give them concessions. You don't want an even number of parties because they would form 2 permanent coalitions. You don't want 3 because you just have a 2-party system with 1 permanent kingmaker. So for parties, 5 is the best number. It creates balance and competition. In this system, parties compete with each other to nominate a candidate that you would choose, but have an incentive to cooperate on public policy. Public funding of parties will be proportional to the number of seats they win. Small donations are allowed to politicians, but no large dollar donations or super PACs. Creating a system with a static number of ideological parties helps to protect our democracy from dictators who defeat the system of checks and balances by starting a party over which they have sole control, and using the party to seize each of the various branches of government. It also protects from single-issue parties which have a poor grasp of the issues and present their policy as a panacea. To realize these benefits, we'll need strong rules so parties remain independent, innovative, and always have an incentive to compete for your vote. Although it's unlikely to be necessary, we'll also need a process to replace a party that stopped competing for voters with one that will. There are many reasons to dislike Congress. To fix it, we are going to start by splitting it apart so its 2 bodies have their own dedicated roles. The House of Representatives will now occupy the Supervisory Branch and will represent the nation's special interests, which are the many communities, states, and industries that make up the country. We need direct input from these groups because businesses know their industry better than voters or bureaucrats, and a representative from your district knows your community's needs better than national representatives. However, when business and local interests can write laws, they descend on otherwise good bills to add funding for vanity projects, loopholes for donors, and exceptions for their district or preferred industry. So, the Supervisory Branch will get all the powers of our current Congress that aren't lawmaking. They vote for or against policy made by other branches and provide feedback to keep the federal government in line. The House will have 500 representatives from geographic districts across the country. Each district is drawn so its electorate is as homogeneous as possible. This will make the House more diverse and give your community real representation. When districting, we'll double weight our most isolated areas, so there are about 50 extra rural seats for those who don't live near large population centers. These 550 members have a 6-year term, so your representative can spend their time governing rather than campaigning. We'll also have 50 members appointed by state legislatures to restrain the federal government, and 50 members elected by large taxpayers who get votes proportional to the federal tax they pay. Direct representation gives money a legitimate voice, so the pressure to bribe your representative is reduced. These 100 House members have a 2-year term, so they are tied closely to the institutions they represent. The election to the House is ranked choice. Each ballot has 5 slots reserved for the nominees of each of the 5 parties. Voters rank candidates, and the least popular candidate is eliminated. The votes for that candidate are redistributed, and the process repeated until a winner has the majority of their vote. Because candidates need support from a majority of voters to win, they are more representative of their constituents, and more likely to work with members of other parties and run a clean, competitive general election. The Senate will be elected every 2 years in a national proportional election. Before elections, parties submit a list of potential senators. Voters select their 2 favorite parties. The favorite party gets 2 votes, and the second favorite party gets 1. Each party receives a number of seats equal to the percent they got of the popular vote. So, if the Labor Party received 9% of the vote, they get 9 seats in the Senate. Each party in the Senate works to pass legislation that works for the nation as a whole, so they are better positioned to win national elections. This means better laws because every lawmaker wants and can get your vote no matter where you are in the country, even if you already have a favorite party. To get your vote, parties will need to offer you teams of legislators that represent a variety of viewpoints, geographies, and professions. These legislators have some independence from their party, because parties can only change their Senate list once every 6 years. The Senate creates budgets, writes laws, passes them by majority, and can override one veto with a 2/3 supermajority. They can impeach any office holder and send them to the House for trial. The Senate also chooses nominees to the Supreme Court. Every 2 years, the 4 caucuses in the Senate that do not share a party with the president choose a nominee for the Supreme Court. Then, they eliminate the least popular nominee. The president chooses one of the final 3. This means the Supreme Court will be what it was meant to be, nonpartisan. Those appointed to the Supreme Court hold office for 18 years, with a new member added every 2 years. Term limits mean that there's less pressure to nominate inexperienced judges, and it keeps senile dinosaurs off the court. In addition to their current role, they conduct the census, draw House districts, and adjust state boundaries. Among the greatest liabilities to our federal system are large states, which are simultaneously ungovernable and tremendously influential, and small states which turn themselves into tax and regulatory havens. Both undermine the laws of average-sized states. The best way to empower states over the long term is to create a way to right-size them so they represent cohesive regional interests. As the only nonpartisan branch of government, it's the judicial which will administer elections. This means creating an integrated, national, secure election system and certifying the outcome of elections. If they fail to certify a Senate election, governors backfill the Senate with 2 appointees each. If they fail to certify a presidential election, or if the president dies in office, the nation's governors are convened and they choose a replacement to serve until the next federal election. When voting for president, voters select the candidate they believe would do a good job. If 50% of voters approve of a candidate, the most approved of candidate wins. Otherwise, candidates are eliminated through ranked choice vote. We'll also add a public service requirement to keep out celebrities who have name recognition but no track record. Electing a president by consensus makes the president more likely to be even-handed in administering the law and improves the judicial branch because the president doesn't appoint radicals to the court. Because the legislative process is simpler, there's also less room for policymaking through executive order. We'll also add a fast-track repeal process so outdated laws can be sent straight to the House for repeal. The role of vice president will be dropped. Vice presidents are typically selected to help the president win the election by balancing the ticket, rather than as a good candidate in their own right. It's a ceremonial position with no power that might drop you into a position of ultimate power. We'll adjust tie-breaking and succession rules to close the gap. Now for all the extra items needed to make the system work. The House, Senate, and Supreme Court all have an 18-year term limit. Sitting politicians have to move their wealth into a blind trust which invests in domestic assets. Spending to influence politics by corporations and non-citizens is illegal. Political spending by citizens is capped at a flat annual value. Every non-imprisoned U.S. citizen over 18 living in the U.S. will have the right to vote. Taxpayers living outside the U.S. can vote for Senate and President. Those born in the U.S. only get citizenship if a parent is a citizen. Territories need independence or incorporation into existing states. Creating an improved system is best achieved by holding a constitutional convention. Our Constitution invites this, but doesn't clarify how 34 states are supposed to negotiate the scope, representation, time, or place for the convention. We just need a simple amendment to Article 5 to trigger a workable constitutional convention. This convention will likely not create the system I've described here, but it will create a renewed constitution which gives our nation a fighting chance. So, have we fixed America in 15 minutes? No! What we've done is laid out a cohesive system of checks and balances, with a separation of powers between co-equal branches, which takes into account the past 200 years of lessons learned. You may disagree on how our Constitution needs to be changed, but I hope you agree that we need to and can improve our system of checks and balances before they collapse. We didn't just inherit this nation from our parents, we are borrowing it from our children. If we want them to have a functional system of government, it's our job to create one. Please consider reaching out to your congressional representatives and ask them to amend Article 5 to trigger a workable constitutional convention. In addition, you can reach out to your representatives in your state's legislature and express support for the calling of a national constitutional convention under our current rules. If you don't want to put it in your own words, I've got a sample letter in the description of this video. Our republic is worth saving. I hope we choose to save it. Thank you for watching.